pleasure it is to be here with you, face to face, in the same room, after our annual conversations were so rudely interrupted by the COVID pandemic. By the way, my name is Simon Mizrahi, and I am the Director for Delivery Performance Management Results here at the African Development Bank, and it will be my pleasure to be moderating this session. Now, today, we're going to talk about something I know you care deeply about, and that is the bank's financial and development performance. Now, the reason why we're talking about finance and development together is that they go very much hand in hand. No development without finance, and I'd say very little finance without development. In just a few minutes, I will be asking 5 of the bank's vice presidents to join me here on stage to talk about that intricate relationship between finance and development. But before we do that, it is my immense honor and my privilege to invite here on stage the Senior Vice President of the African Development Bank Group, Swazi Shabalala. Senior Vice President, Swazi, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, and welcome to all of you governors, deputies, President of the African Development Bank, distinguished guests, and bank colleagues. I'm happy to be standing here in front of you in person after a 2-year hiatus, and when we held our meetings virtually. So much has happened since we last met physically in Malabo in 2019, as the world experienced a 1-in-100-year event, the COVID pandemic, which shut down the world and affected our operations in ways we never imagined. Our staff were heroic in the circumstances, under the determined leadership of our president, insisting that we double our efforts to help Africa in this difficult time. The entire organization, from Cape to Cairo, if you allow me the liberty, worked from home within days of the pandemic being declared, recalibrating literally everything so that we could play our counter-cyclical role. Because of the unique circumstances of the last 2 years, we have also recalibrated the financial presentation and annual development effectiveness report to give you a wider perspective on how we responded in the areas of our high 5 operational priorities. I will kick off these proceedings by providing a précis of key activities and achievements during the period under review. You will recall that in 2019, things ended on a high, the largest capital increase in the bank's history, and a substantial 15th replenishment of the fund. Our ambitions were set, and we were buoyed by the confidence shown by you, the governors and deputies, as Africa's premier development organization. The general capital increase and the fund replenishment, however, are more than resource exercises. They are, in fact, a contract between the bank's shareholders and management on the future of this institution, setting out a far-reaching reform program designed to make good use of the additional resources. Our reforms have made us a more resilient organization. The bank has made tremendous strides in implementing these reforms that we agreed together. I will give you a better sense of what we have achieved together since we last met physically in Malabo. On the bank's financial sustainability, we did not allow the crisis to go to waste. We strengthened our long-term financial sustainability framework, ensuring that we build more resilience to future shocks. We updated our financial and risk policies. We undertook a review of our cost structures and are currently developing the bank's new cost containment framework to optimize the resources available for fulfilling our mandate. We updated strategies and policies to further enhance our approach to priority areas such as private sector development, to better focus our efforts on private sector development in low-income and transition states, on climate change and green growth, governance and debt management, including the debt action plan and related policies. We streamlined the bank's organizational structure and institutional arrangements to improve our organizational efficiency. For instance, the organizational fine-tuning has been approved and is in the process of being implemented, with the new People and Talent Management Vice Presidency being put in place. The people strategy, the total compensation framework, and a revised staff performance management system have been adopted, and I really want to recognize our Vice President, VP Magala, for his stellar achievement in getting these items over the line. He's been simply amazing. Our annual work planning has been improved and is being aligned with our budget cycle. Steady progress has also been achieved in the re-engineering of our business processes under the Wakanda program, and we are making strides towards being a smart bank. We have introduced zero tolerance for sexual harassment, abuse, and exploitation through a new presidential directive, and we have introduced new measures to increase the speed of internal investigations and apply heightened focus on managing operational risk in transition states. We continue to strengthen our leadership team and are proud that our gender equity is being made real, as you will soon see. Our recent senior appointments will provide strong leadership in key oversight functions of independent evaluation, internal audit, risk management, integrity, and anti-corruption, and we are happy to announce the new Director for Gender, Women, and Civil Society. We did much more, but time prevents me from going through everything. Taken together, these reforms have made us stronger, more resilient, and better equipped to respond to Africa's current and future priorities. An example of our newfound strength, working together as one bank, is the recently approved $1.5 billion facility for fighting the potential hunger crisis, which was approved by our Board of Directors last week, Friday. But it was conceived, developed, and approved within 1 month to mitigate the impact of the looming food crisis. So let me take this opportunity to thank all of you for your support and unflinching confidence in the bank, in your bank. So the panel will go into more depth of some of the issues that I have broached in my opening remarks. Let me hand over now to Mr. Simon Mizrahi so that he can not only add his own words, but also moderate today's discussion. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
One of the things that I take out of those, your opening remarks is a sense of achievement, but not only a sense of achievement. I think the word that comes to mind is resilience. The bank's capacity, I think through the impressive initiatives that you've just presented to us, not only to rise to the occasion, but more importantly, to deliver for Africa. So thank you very much, Senior Vice President. Before the vice presidents, 5 of the vice presidents, join me here to discuss the bank's performance in a little bit more detail, what I'd like to do now, as Swazi suggested, is very much set the stage for the next conversation. And in particular, what I'd like to do is explain how the bank thinks about the notion of performance. At the African Development Bank, we don't measure our performance by the money we spend, and I say that looking at Hassatu straight in the eye. We measure our performance by the lasting changes we bring to the lives of the people across the continent. And to give you a better sense of the extent of the bank's activities across the continent, have a close look. Sorry, could I have the presentation, please? Have a close look at this map. What this map shows is, in fact, the geographic location of the 309 operations that were completed since 2019. Just take a few seconds to look at that array. 1,125 geographic locations mapped according to the high fives. And if you were to add up all of those points, all of those 309 operations, it would in fact represent $15 billion in investment in Africa's future. That's an important point. But we're not here to talk about money. We're here to talk about the bank's development impact. So what I'd like to do is look at that map, and what I want to do is zoom in to a particular region of Africa that we're all very familiar with, which is West Africa. So let's zoom in and see what's going on in terms of development impact in West Africa. There we are. Now, the map in front of you I find is particularly interesting because what it does is that it shows the development impact of our operations in 7 West African countries. They're all represented in white here. And what we've done here at the African Development Bank is develop state-of-the-art technology to better assess the impact of each and every one of our operations. So what we did, in fact, is something quite interesting, is we combined satellite imagery with GPS data coming out of household surveys, and that provided us a way to be able to assess with incredible accuracy the impact of our road operations, agricultural operations, and energy operations, and how, in practice, these operations changed the lives of whole communities in West Africa. Let me take a few examples of what that means in practice. Look at Togo and Benin. You can see it on the map over there. In Togo and Benin, our multinational road program allowed us to reduce time travel between Lomé and Cotonou from 11 hours just to 5 hours thanks to that road. Another example, not represented on this map, actually you can see it in green over here on the right, is in terms of impact on women and girls. Thanks to the various operations, some of the operations represented in this map, an additional 7 million women and girls gained access to better health services. Now, these are just 2 examples. I could be giving many other examples. I won't be doing so in the interest of time. I know you're waiting to have lunch, but these are just 2 examples. We at the African Development Bank want to make sure, and this is my job in particular, that each and every one of the operations that I showed earlier on is as successful as these ones in terms of achieving its development goals. And when we don't achieve our goals, and that happens even in the best organizations, we need to know why we haven't achieved our goals and what we need to do better. That's what's important. And to help us do just that, we have developed what we call in our own jargon a corporate results measurement framework that's summarized here on the screen. And what this picture snapshot tells you is that it pinpoints very transparently where the bank is doing well in green and where the bank could be doing better. Let me just take one area where we believe the bank could be doing better, and that is highlighted here, timely implementation of operations. Let me explain why, what is happening in this particular case. Now, here we're dealing with a particular challenge. Lockdown and travel restrictions imposed by COVID-19 meant that in practice it was very difficult for us and for our operations and task managers to undertake the missions for project appraisal, for project supervision, and for project completion. And what this means in practice is that up to a third of our operations did experience delays in 2021. Let me turn to another example. Now, despite the formidable headwinds that I've just been talking about, the bank delivered some remarkable achievements in 2021. Take the case of our water and sanitation operations. They gave more than 8 million people access to improved water services. And that's actually 3 times the target that we set for ourselves in 2021. So quite an achievement. Beth, I know you're here, so this very much falls within your shop. And at the corporate level, this is focusing on project, but at the corporate level, the bank is recognized as one of the leading development organizations in the world. But don't take my word for it. Let's see what other organizations had to say about the African Development Bank. So this is what the Global Finance magazine had to say about the African development. It, in fact, ranked the bank, the African Development Bank Group, first, the best multilateral financial institution. The Center for Global Development ranked the concessional window of the African Development Bank, ADF, that we'll be celebrating in a few hours. It ranked the ADF second in terms of quality of concessional lending. And when it comes to transparency of the bank, Publish What You Fund ranks the bank 4th out of 79 multilateral and bilateral organizations. So quite an achievement. Now you'll find these and many other examples how the bank holds itself accountable for its performance in this year's edition of the Annual Development Effectiveness Review. And I must say, I am very proud that we are launching the 12th edition here in Accra. Thank you very much. I think that now that we have set the stage, let's really shift gear and go straight to the heart of the matter to discuss in greater detail the bank's financial and development performance. I would like to invite to join me here on this stage 5 most eminent speakers. The Vice President for Finance and Chief Financial Officer, please welcome Nsele Hassatu Diop. The Vice President, where is he, for Private Sector, Infrastructure and Industrialization, Mr. Solomon Quaino. The Vice President for Regional Development, Integration, a lot of integration, and Business Delivery, Ms. Yassine Fall. Thank you. I mentioned Beth earlier on, the Vice President for Agriculture, Social and Human Development, Beth Dunford. And last, but certainly not least, I'm looking for him, the Vice President, here he is, the Vice President for Energy, Climate Change and Green Growth, Mr. Kevin Kariuki. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your panel. Now, Vice Presidents, I hope you're all comfortably seated. Let me check, yes? Because I'm going to ask you some very tough questions here. And Vice President Fowler, I'm going to start with you. I think across the continent, what we're seeing are early signs of economic recovery, and in particular, and the President mentioned at the Governor's Dialogue yesterday, what we're seeing at the end of 2021 is a situation where the economic growth in many African countries is really picking up momentum at the end of 2021. At the same time, we all know, especially the people sitting in this room, that many African countries are still reeling from the economic and social impact from the pandemic. So, Vice President Fowl, this is my question to you. How has the bank been supporting African countries weather the crisis, and how do you see the situation evolving in the near future? Vice President Fowl.
Avant de parler du rôle de la banque, je crois qu'il faut parler des actions remarquables que les gouvernements africains ont prises face à la crise de la pandémie Covid-19. Ces gouvernements ont pris des interventions de renforcement des systèmes de santé publique, de soutien d'opérations de soutien budgétaire d'une ampleur sans précédent et étendu des filets de protection sociale en faveur des groupes les plus vulnérables face à la pandémie. Et pour ce qui est de la banque, dès avril 2020, nous avons, avec l'appui extraordinaire de notre conseil d'administration, adopté une facilité de réponse rapide à la pandémie Covid-19. Et par le biais de cette facilité, près de 4 milliards de dollars ont été décaissés auprès des pays africains pour soutenir notamment leurs budgets nationaux soumis à rude épreuve.
Merci. Et concrètement, ça veut dire quoi, Vice-présidente Van?
Eh bien, concrètement...
Est-ce que je peux vous demander, pardon, à tous, peut-être vous rapprocher de vos microphones, parce qu'on ne vous entend pas toujours très bien au fond de la salle, et je crois que c'est très important que tout le monde vous entende très clairement, parce que ce que vous avez à dire est particulièrement intéressant. Donc, concrètement, sur les résultats qui ont été attendus dans les pays qui ont bénéficié du CRF.
Eh bien, ça veut dire très concrètement que dans des pays comme le Malawi, le Sénégal, la Côte d'Ivoire, grâce aux ressources déployées par la banque, les gouvernements ont pu subventionner pendant plusieurs mois les factures d'eau et d'électricité des ménages les plus vulnérables. En ce qui concerne ces pays, près d'1 million de ménages ont bénéficié de cet appui exceptionnel. Cela veut dire, dans un pays particulièrement vulnérable comme la Sierra Leone, les 11 000 agents de santé ont bénéficié d'appui pour pouvoir participer aux interventions accrues qu'a occasionné la pandémie Covid-19. Mais le secteur privé n'a pas été en reste. Nous avons, grâce aux interventions de la banque, permis à 300 000 PME du continent de bénéficier de compensations face à l'arrêt temporaire ou prolongé de leurs activités, et en particulier grâce à des garanties de crédit. Je pourrais aller donner d'autres exemples dans d'autres régions. En fait, la banque est intervenue très tôt, très vite et très fortement pour soutenir nos pays membres face à la pandémie Covid-19.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Vice-présidente. Vice President Dunford, I'd like to turn to you for my next question. I think we've heard some quite impressive achievements of how the bank has been supporting African government, African countries, and, as the Vice President just said, supporting the African private sector in terms of weathering this crisis. Now, just as one crisis seems to be receding, it looks like another global crisis, a food crisis, is rearing its ugly head. So my question to you is this: how prepared is Africa to deal with this new crisis, or even avert the crisis? And more importantly, what is the bank going to do about it? Vice President Dunford.
the mic. Now, yes. No. It doesn't work then.
I think we just need to give the technicians a second, maybe, Beth, so that we can fix. Or even if you speak at the lectern, if the microphone isn't working.
You can reprendre celui de Yacine.
Work?
Oh, now it is.
Hello? Okay.
There we are.
So, thanks. Thank you so much for this question. And, you know, millions of Africans go to bed hungry every night. And this unacceptable level of food insecurity is on the rise due to the war in Ukraine. And this war has exposed Africa's vulnerability because of its heavy dependence on imports to meet basic needs. So we're seeing a 20 to 50% price increase in basic staples. Fertilizer prices increase by 200 to 300%. And this crisis, of course, is made worse because it is on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic in the face of climate change and other shocks. So, but this is not the first food price crisis that we've faced. This one is worse, but this one is different because we are better prepared to meet this challenge. And it's because we have been investing in agriculture. And in particular, we've invested in new technologies that really help farmers to increase their own productivity, even in the face of climate change. So these new climate-smart technologies that we didn't have a decade ago, we didn't have 5 years ago, are transformative, but they are not getting out to farmers at the scale that we need. And so our Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation Program, largely funded by ADF, is working to fix just this. To provide an example of TAT's work in Ethiopia, where we saw a country that is dependent on wheat imports, 1.6 million metric tons of costly wheat imports every year. This is before the price crisis. We've been able to turn that around by really accelerating the dissemination, the production of these new technologies, so farmers could plant, for example, heat-tolerant wheat in areas where they couldn't plant before because it was too hot or it was too marginal. So now they can plant, increase their yields, and then be able, and this has been planted in over 600,000 hectares. And as our president has said, he's been told by the Prime Minister of Ethiopia that this year they will not be importing wheat and expect to export wheat in the coming year. So that type of revolutionary change really, really quickly over the course of very few short years is what we're looking to scale up in the new facility, the $1.5 billion Africa Emergency Food Production Facility that aims to reach 20 million farmers with improved technologies and inputs they need to produce 38 million metric tons to really mitigate this crisis now and really lay the foundation for increased production on the continent over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Dunton. That was fascinating, especially I think the potential impact of initiatives like the TAC is really very impressive. Let me now turn to you, Vice President Nsele. You are, as I mentioned earlier on, the Vice President for Finance and also the Chief Financial Officer. So far, our conversation has really focused around some issues of development challenges. We've just heard from Beth about the particular challenge in Africa and the food crisis. But as we said earlier on, there is no development without development finance. In the audience today, we have quite a few ministers of economy and finance. And I know that one question that is at the very top of their minds, and not only their minds, is the health of the bank's finance. What can you tell us about the financial performance in 2021?
Très bien. Donc nous avons eu de très bons résultats financiers pour l'année 2021. avec un revenu distribuable de 281 millions de dollars. Il s'agit du troisième montant le plus élevé des 10 dernières années. Alors, laissez-moi rassurer une partie de l'audience. Nous avons bien un mandat de développement et la maximisation du profit n'est pas notre priorité première. Et d'ailleurs, 80% de nos activités sont des prêts souverains et qui sont facturés avec zéro marge de profit. Alors, la performance financière de la banque est ancrée sur deux choses. Un, le portefeuille ou les prêts que nous faisons au secteur privé. Et en deuxième lieu, la performance de nos portefeuilles de trésorerie. Et le Conseil des gouverneurs vient d'approuver la distribution du revenu de la banque et a autorisé donc, que l'on conserve 70% du revenu pour renforcer nos fonds propres et a autorisé que le reste soit distribué à notre guichet concessionnel, le Fonds africain de développement, comme vous l'avez indiqué, qui célèbre ses 50 ans cette année, et pour également financer des initiatives clés pour le développement du continent. Alors vous serez peut-être surpris de savoir que durant ces 10 dernières années, enfin au cours de ces 10 dernières années, la Banque africaine de développement a réalisé un bénéfice cumulé de 2,5 milliards de dollars. Alors ce montant n'est pas si loin des 3,6 milliards de dollars versés par nos actionnaires lors de la 6e augmentation générale du capital de 2010. Et plus de la moitié de ce bénéfice a été distribué donc, pour le développement du continent. Donc un équilibre entre le développement effectiveness, et la soutenabilité financière de l'institution.
Mais rassurez-moi tout de suite, vice-présidente Nsele. Donc, concernant la santé financière de la banque, tout est impeccable.
Elle est très bonne.
Elle est très bonne.
Vous en doutiez?
Merci. À aucun moment. Vice President Karuka, I'd like to turn to you for the next question. I know that only a few months ago you were one of Africa's proud standard bearers at COP26 in Glasgow, and I'm particularly glad we've also got Minister Andrew Mitchell with us here at the table. And I also know that in a few months, only a few months, you will be heading to the COP27 in Egypt. So my question to you is this: what did you take away from the Glasgow, and what do you expect to bring to the table in Cairo?
Yeah, so from a bank perspective, there were three major outcomes from COP26, and not in any particular order. The first one was the call for 45% reduction in global carbon dioxide emissions in order to reduce emissions by 2030 and to help achieve net zero by 2050. The second, and almost related, was the announcement of the $8.5 billion to accelerate the decarbonization of South Africa's power sector. And third was the enhanced profile of adaptation, to which the bank played a significant role throughout 2021. And this led to many developed nations committing to at least doubling their provision of adaptation finance. Looking forward to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, COP27 offers a genuine opportunity to engender trust between developed nations and developing countries through the translation of commitments into tangible actions, such as the transparent progress in mobilizing the $100 billion per year pledged by developed nations. On its part, the bank last year allocated 41% of its investments as climate finance, exceeding the 40% target, and has since COP26 mobilized over $1 billion for the Desert to Power, which is truly transformative. Also, we also need to see progress in resource mobilization efforts for South Africa's just energy transition. For example, the bank will concretize by COP27 an innovative financing mechanism for mobilizing up to or more than $40 billion for South Africa's just energy transition, with minimum impact on the country's fiscus. Finally, we also need tangible evidence towards the doubling of adaptation finance relative to 2019. Here, the bank continued to raise the profile on adaptation and recorded 67% adaptation finance in 2021. This is in addition to kickstarting the mobilization of $25 billion for adaptation action by 2025, together with the Global Center on Adaptation.
Thank you very much. Impressive. Vice President Quaino, over to you. Now, we've just heard from Vice President Kariuki, I think, the imperative need to scale up financing for adaptation. And what this means, basically, for me, this is how I understand it, it means more investment in climate-resilient infrastructure. You've seen where I'm coming to. So, we all know that Africa's needs for infrastructure outstrips the bank's capacity to fund it. So my question is, how do you plan to address this conundrum and close the gap between Africa's financing needs and the bank's capacity to fund it?
Thank you very much, Simon. Now, one of the interesting things that I kept hearing, this is my first in-person annual meeting since joining the bank, and I think it's the same for Kevin and Beth. Hassatu and Yassine are
old-timers,
more expert at this. But one of the things we kept hearing at the board when we joined is, this is the infrastructure bank of Africa. This is the infrastructure bank of Africa. And this is reflected even in our portfolio. Now, infrastructure covers several areas: energy, telecoms, transport. But I think when it comes to that point, not only is it energy and also renewable and resilient energy, but it's also really about road infrastructure, bridge infrastructure, multimodal transport infrastructure. And I began to have a better appreciation of the fact that 25% of our portfolio is actually in the transport infrastructure space. But one of the surprising evidence that I saw recently came from the Center for Global Development, that actually looked at infrastructure finance that mobilizes private sector participation over a long period, 2007 to 2020. And guess what? The African Development Bank was ranked #1 over this cumulative period, ahead of our partners. And by the way, Simon, we would do this with partners, but we were ranked ahead of our partners. My former institution, IFC, we were ahead of them, the World Bank, EIB, and I think this is actually great evidential support of the fact that the African Development Bank are leaders in the infrastructure space, but we will continue to partner with others. So to answer your question, first of all, partnerships is going to be key. Partnerships is going to be key. But I still try to get Hassatu to give me more firepower, whether it's through hybrid capital, ADF going to markets, etc. We also need to actually have a little more muscle to provide the leadership that we want in this space. But public sector funding, especially with the limited fiscal space of a lot of our countries, is not going to be sufficient. So finding a way to mobilize private capital is going to be critical. Finding a way to develop projects, because the big problem really in infrastructure is not necessarily the lack of funding, because we have a lot of MDBs that can provide what I call the bridge financing. And then, of course, we have the trillions of dollars that the president was talking about in the institutional investor marketplace. But all of them are really looking for bankable projects to invest in. So we're going to spend a lot of time investing really in creating the pipeline of not just bankable infrastructure projects going forward, but climate resilient bankable infrastructure projects. And so this is one of the reasons why the president came up with a vision of the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, where we're looking to mobilize about $500 million to stimulate the development of green and greener infrastructure across Africa. We have to be deliberate about this because it's not going to happen by accident. This sort of fund is what is going to make, true, for example, the Lagos-Abidjan highway. I mean, this is a highway that really connects 5 different countries, but it's more than a highway. It's an economic corridor. And this begins to feed into really the way we look at infrastructure. It's not infrastructure as an end to itself, but it's really infrastructure to power industrialization, and industrialization means greater value addition for the commodities that we competitively produce in Africa. So, my direct answer to you, Simon, is we're going to have to really be deliberate. We're going to have to address, the project development pipeline. I need Hassatu to continue to raise more capital for us to provide the right leadership, but we would only do this with partners, other MDBs, but ultimately we will crowd in the private sector, both in terms of strategic operators, but also institutional investors who have significant capital that we can bring to Africa's infrastructure development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solomon. And let me reassure you straight away, I will be grilling Vice President Assede in terms of our capacity to fund Africa's growth in just a minute. But before that, I want to come back to you, Vice President Fall. Now, I've often heard President Adesina talk about the triangle of disaster. In other words, the complicated nexus that links together poverty, high unemployment, and in particular, the climate crisis. And this nexus, as we know, fuels in turn migration and greater insecurity. So Vice President Fall, my question to you is this. What critical path is available to African countries to break free from that triangle of disaster? And what is the bank doing about it? Yassine.
Triangle of disaster, le triangle de la catastrophe. Ça veut dire insécurité, comme vous l'avez dit, Simon, absence d'emploi, choc climatique. La banque s'est attachée à apporter des solutions innovantes pour créer des emplois et activités génératrices de revenus, notamment auprès des populations les plus vulnérables, les jeunes, les femmes dont s'occupe ma collègue et amie Beth, et surtout à intensifier les mesures de prévention et de protection contre les effets du changement climatique, source de conflits et d'insécurité. Des défis multiples et persistants dans les régions sensibles telles que le Sahel, la Corne de l'Afrique, le bassin du lac Tchad. Nous employons à créer un changement de paradigme par la création de richesses, à travers le financement de projets d'infrastructures intégrés, avec de fortes composantes de renforcement de la résilience communautaire. Par exemple, Mali, Mauritanie, région du pays du Sahel, nous avons offert des financements et de l'assistance technique aux petites entreprises. Cela représente jusqu'à à peu près 40 000 emplois, dont 12 000 pour des femmes. Dans l'Union du fleuve Mano, un projet de facilitation de transport routier et projet d'écosystème d'affaires inclusif est destiné aux femmes commerçantes transfrontalières. Le président en parle souvent des commerçantes qui voyagent d'un pays à l'autre et j'espère qu'il aura l'occasion de partager avec vous cette expérience et leur importance pour le développement de l'Afrique. Dans cette région du fleuve Mano, nous cherchons à connecter les gens, consolider la paix existante et accélérer la transformation économique de la région principalement. Nos interventions transformatrices sont dans l'agriculture, l'environnement, l'énergie, le secteur social. Comme les programmes de renforcement de la résilience alimentaire et nutritionnelle, qu'évoquait Bess tout à l'heure, un projet approuvé récemment qui vise à augmenter la production animale et végétale de 30% au profit de 3 millions d'éleveurs et agriculteurs qui auront ainsi accès aux technologies, à des technologies agricoles innovantes, comme le TAT. Et nous avons accordé une grande importance au partenariat stratégique établissant le lien entre l'humanitaire, le développement et la consolidation de la paix. Enfin, sur le plan financier, je voudrais évoquer le travail en cours à la banque, le travail de réflexion pour créer des obligations d'investissement indexées sur la sécurité, qui visent à exploiter les marchés des capitaux à cette fin, pour mobiliser des ressources et permettre aux pays de faire face aux effets de l'insécurité. Et ce véhicule aura un énorme potentiel, Simon, pour aider à sortir de ce triangle de la catastrophe.
Merci beaucoup, Yacine. Merci beaucoup, Yacine. Vice President Nsele, unfortunately, I think we're coming to the end of this conversation, but I wanted to make sure that the last question was for you. And I want to come back to a point that Solomon was raising. So far, and in particular, the critical question of how we go about financing Africa's development and how we go about funding Africa's growth. So my question to you is this: how is the bank mobilizing additional additional resources to help fund Africa's growth? And in particular, if you can answer the question about funding Africa's need for additional infrastructure.
As you know, Africa is worrying on many fronts. This pandemic, food insecurity, water insecurity, climate change, the infrastructure gap, and very unfortunately, many other crises to come. So in line with our mandate, we use our balance sheet, we use our AAA rating in order to maximize the resources to further our development mandate. And we do know that we cannot do this alone, as you rightly indicated, and we partner with and bring shareholders, foundations, banks, other institutions, in order to maximize our resources and the impact of our resources. So we are undoubtedly a catalyst for bringing additional resources into the African continent. We have developed instruments in order to recycle our capital and also to bring in investors, private sector investors, and more importantly, first-time investors into Africa. So in a nutshell, we optimize our balance sheet. We have very well publicized transactions that have put the African Development Bank at the forefront of innovation, and I'm not going to go through them. But because our mandate is formidable and because our resources are limited, we have to be innovative and we have to be creative. So yesterday, the president of the bank signed with the Minister for Africa of the UK room-to-run synthetics transaction, which, when implemented, is going to unlock $2 billion of firepower, Solomon, for investment in green projects. So additional lending headroom, Simon, crowding in private sector. And let me end by saying that we are not constrained by our AAA. We leverage our AAA.
Thank you very much. Well, let me just check with Solomon. Does that answer your question, Solomon? And I hope you feel that $2 billion in additional resources is sufficient to fund. Oh, you want to share it?
No, not only does it answer my question, we're partners in ensuring that that happens.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, this meeting is now coming to an end. And let me just say, Vice Presidents, panelists, what a pleasure it has been to be having this conversation with you. I must say, I've learned so much from what you've just said. You haven't had much time, but you've made it very dense and very interesting. But I'm not going to let you go without asking you one last question. And there is a trick. I'm only going to give you 10 seconds to answer this question, all of you, each one of you. So, in no more than 10 seconds, please tell me why you feel optimistic about Africa's future and why you think it's going to be a bright, sunshiny day. Hassatu? Yes. I'll be taking that order.
Allô? Ok, très bien. Je pense que, tricky question, 10 secondes. Beaucoup d'espoir pour l'Afrique, parce que l'Afrique a fait montre de résilience, ça c'est la première chose. Et beaucoup d'attention portée sur les femmes, sur l'autonomisation des femmes. Et pour moi, une Afrique qui gagne, c'est une Afrique qui est portée par les femmes.
Parfait. Merci. Solomon?
So one of the things that I've realized since joining AFDB is the passion that people who work at AFDB, including at the board, have for Africa. When you have the passion, you are going to be able to actually overcome the obstacles. And so really with that passion, and for me, Africa is my passion, it's not a job. With that passion, we have no choice but to overcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. Yacine, do you have the passion?
Absolument. Nous sommes tous les jours et dans toutes les circonstances aux côtés des pays et des populations africaines pour renforcer leur résilience et affronter tous les défis, qu'ils soient de la sécurité, du développement et du progrès économique et social.
Merci beaucoup, Yacine. Vice President Dunford, reasons to be optimistic. There are many.
There are so many reasons to be optimistic. We have the technologies, we know what to do, we have to scale it. And importantly, why I'm really optimistic is that we're really getting very innovative of how to get financing and technical assistance in the hands of women and youth to bring their drive, their creativity, and their knowledge to really fueling the businesses and the economies of Africa going forward.
Thank you, Beth. Mr. Kevin Kariuki, you have the last word.
Thank you. For me, what gives me a lot of hope for Africa is Africa's abundant energy resources. For example, Africa has 40% of global solar potential, of which less than 1% has been harnessed. So this is the energy that will be harnessed for a green and sustainable trajectory for the African continent. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm round of applause to the Vice Presidents and our panelists. It's been a pleasure having you here. And this now concludes the presentation of the bank's financial and development performance. It's been a pleasure moderating this conversation. Many thanks for tuning in. Bon appétit, and see you next year in Cairo. Thank you.